The most important thing that you can learn in woodworking is how to sharpen your hand tools. Without sharp hand tools, you just can't do good work. And it's one of the things I think that people struggle a lot with because they don't fully understand what it means for a hand tool to be sharp. So what I want to explain today is not only how I sharpen, but also the things that are involved in getting a tool sharp. And that way, if you can understand the critical things that are involved, you can really sharpen something any way you want to. You don't have to sharpen it the way that I do. The first thing you need to do with any hand tool is to flatten the back and also polish it. After that, you're going to have to maintain the primary bevel. Finally, you have to hone the cutting edge. That's all there is to it. It's those three things. There are a lot of different ways to do each one of them. And all you need to do is pick one way for each of the three tasks and stick with it until you master it. Don't switch from one sharpening media to another. That's not the way you want to go. Pick one, learn how to sharpen, and then if you're unhappy with the medium that you're using, you can go on to something else. So whenever you have a new tool, that's when you really have to do all three steps. Flatten, polish the back, maintain the primary bevel, and also hone a secondary bevel. So we're going to start there. Here's a plain blade that is new, and the first thing that we have to do is flatten the back and polish it. Now I do this on a granite plate with sandpaper. You can do it a lot of different ways. It doesn't really matter how. You just need to master that technique. Get it flat and then polish it. With a plain blade, you only need about the first 1/16 of an inch flat and polished. It's a little easier to do more than that, so we'll probably do the first 1/2 inch here. With a chisel, because the chisel back is used as a reference surface whenever you're paring, you need to flatten and polish about the first inch of the blade. Anyways, let's get started with this plain blade. This first grit is about 150. It removes steel really quickly and helps you get flat fast. Now what you're looking for here is a scratch pattern, but you can also see the difference in the color between the steel as it came from the manufacturer, and then also what the 120 or the 150 grit did to it rather. And you want to keep working it until you get all of the scratch pattern from the manufacturer out. I'm not putting a lot of downward pressure onto the blade. Just like any cutting tool, you want to let the sandpaper do the cutting, and so you don't put a lot of pressure on. Now mostly we're concerned with right behind the cutting edge, and I can still see some of the scratch pattern that was left by the manufacturing process, so I'm going to work a little bit more. Okay, that looks pretty good, so I'm going to move up to the next grit. And here I'm actually going to go across 90 degrees to what I was just doing, because that makes it easier to see the new scratch pattern. And we have changed the scratch pattern all the way across now. And it's safe to move on to the next level of sandpaper. What I just did was 220, 240. This is going to be a 400 grit. All right. And again, now I'm going 90 degrees to what I just did. You can see even at 400, it's already starting to get a bit of a polish. I can still see scratches though from the previous grit, so I need to keep working. The most critical part on the back of the blade, of a plain blade at any rate, is just right behind the cutting edge. You don't need to worry about stuff back here. It's just behind the cutting edge. All right, that's looking pretty good. What I would do now is move on to my water stones and continue to polish the back. So I've got my water stones out. I'm going to start with the coarsest grit and work up to the polishing stone. Again, just watch right here at the back of the cutting edge. So I'm using a back and forth motion along the long edge of the water stone. Just enough pressure to keep the blade flat on the stone. It's a cutting tool, the water stone is, and just like with any cutting tool, you let it do the cutting. You don't need to add pressure. Okay, it's still some scratches right up here that I need to get rid of, so I'm going to keep working. All right, so that's looking pretty good, and I'm going to move up to my next stone, which is a medium grit stone. It's important that your stones are flat when you do this. All right, that's good. And I'm going to move up to my polishing stone now. Again, just enough pressure to keep the blade flat. So flattening and honing the back of a plane blade, even that small amount, can be fairly time consuming, which is why some people use what's called the ruler trick. And I actually do this on all my plane blades. You take a ruler, put it on your polishing stone, and then set your plane blade on that and move it back and forth and polish the cutting edge. What that does is put a tiny little back bevel, or a secondary bevel is what we call it when you do it on the front side of the blade. And it makes it easier to polish something because you're not polishing a large amount, you're just polishing a tiny little line. And on a plane blade, that's all you need is a tiny little line where it's perfectly flat and polished on the back. That's good. You only need to do the ruler trick on the final stone, your polishing stone. With the back done, you want to flip it over and take care of the bevel. Because this is a new blade, we do not actually have to do anything to the primary bevel. All we're going to do is create a small secondary bevel that's very polished and meets the back at a perfect point. So I've got my blade in a honing guide. I always use a honing guide. Learning to freehand sharpen is somewhat tricky. There are things that you can do to make it more approachable, but since I don't sharpen all the time, I use a honing guide. It gives you repeatable and great results. Don't feel bad about using it. So what I've done with the coarse stone is create a secondary bevel that extends the full width of the blade from corner to corner. And it's been established, so now I'm going to move up to my medium grit stone. It should just take a few strokes back and forth to get rid of the scratches from the previous stone. That looks good. We're all the way across the width. So now I move on to the final stone, the polishing stone. Almost there, just a little bit at either side. If this were a smoothing plane, I would camber the cutting edge. And that means you have a slight radius across its width. And what that does is when you are smoothing, it feathers out the shaving so you don't get any tracks in your surface. I only do that with a smoothing plane. Everything else gets a straight bevel. So this blade's ready to go. I'm going to pop it back in the plane and get to making shavings.